Welcome everyone to this week's IPLD meeting. It's August the 17th, 2020. And as every week, we go over the stuff that we've done in the past week and plan to do the next week. And then we discuss agenda items or questions anyone has, or any open topics. So this week, I start with myself. This week, I don't have anything to report for the IPLD stuff because I haven't done any IPLD related stuff last week. I'm still busy with Filecoin stuff, but this will hopefully be finished soon. So soon I will have again IPLD stuff to report. And next on my list is Peter, but he also writes that he doesn't have anything. So next,
except I need to add that I will not be done this week. So
okay. Yes. Okay, cool. Yes. So next would be Michael. If he
so I mean I can say
back.
it and then I'll write the text in a second. I'm just making tea, so I was off camera for a second. I haven't written up my notes yet, but the main thing was this Filecoin retrieval stuff. So we now know that like the only way to get any data out of the Filecoin network ever is with retrievals and selectors. So we kind of scrambled to try to figure out how we might be able to get the blockchain data out of that. There isn't really a reasonable way with the current methods. So I wrote up kind of why, and then wrote up 2 feature requests that would make it more doable in the future that I kind of expect to get prioritized after the launch. And there's some other fallout, like I talked with Volker today about accelerating some of our work to do WASM-based read-only codecs so that we could have a DAG of read-only codecs that could be linked and that you could safely load off the network and actually be able to read data with a lot more codecs than you ship with. And that's it for that. Made some more progress on the IPJS build tool. It's now building. I'm working on the test side of things so that we handle mainly a thing that Rod brought up over the weekend. And so that should be working really soon. I had a little side quest where I was trying to do a new compiler with just the AST because it actually isn't that hard. But then I realized that there was some other features in rollup that I wanted to use that we're not going to be able to replicate at just the AST. So I actually figured out a way that we can leverage some of the caching and performance stuff that that rollup does and not hit some of the bottlenecks we were hitting before. So that's actually implemented, and it's even faster than it was before I was using all those workers. So that's really cool to see. And that's where I'm at. Rob?
Yeah. So my 2 main things are the HAMPed. Spent most of my week in the Go HAMPed code, making changes and tests and docs, and that stuff's in pull requests in that repo. Sort of handed that off to Filecoin people. It looks like there's just a matter of bandwidth for the other folks to deal with that. Well, it looks like Stephen's been merging some things today, so that's good. And then just back to some JavaScript work, just to try and get some closure on some other things, but nothing else to report other than that. Really wasn't that eventful. I did have Eric along for the ride for some of the HAMP stuff. He was doing some benchmarks and trying to figure out how the flush semantics exactly worked and what they actually benefited. And he got some good docs in for that. But yeah, that's it for me, really.
All right. Does anyone else want to give any updates, or if not, then we can also open for discussions if anyone has anything to talk about or discuss. It looks like it's been a quite quiet week for IPLD.
I mean, a lot actually happened last week and a lot of work got done. It's just that there's not a lot of like open questions related to it. It was all just like things that needed to happen happened. That's about it.
Can we talk a little bit more about how you guys working on Michael, because you spoke to each other already. How do you envision the WASM stuff to be implemented for read-only things? Is this basically going to be a callback for the link loader, or it's going to be more give the WASM a stream and get back blocks, or something else?
No, it's going to be definitely transactional with like all of the block data at once. So it'll just be, you know, here's a block, give me the decoded version of that. Or more accurately, what it may be is like, here is block data in X format, give me back deg CBOR. Because you have to, like, there's going to be some kind of binary serialization anyway, and that's the only one that we know that everybody already has, and that supports the whole data model. So that may be what it does, but some of that detail is still being worked out. But it definitely doesn't need to work with a stream because it's always working with a whole block at a time.
Right. So basically, you're going to incur the penalty of into WASM land and out on every link.
Yeah, it's not intended to be the fastest thing in the world. Like, you know, if you want a really performant codec, like you would ship with a native version, I would imagine. This is mainly like you want to be able to read data that you did not ship with the codec for, and so it may just be a little bit, you know, slower, especially if we end up encoding it into CBOR, because then you're literally gonna pass it off to WASM, get it decoded, and then literally decoded again as deg CBOR. So.
Right. So you can pull the links out, and the mechanism to get a trusted version of a reader or whatever would be how, like let's say you're a miner and you get a deal, and what happens next?
So we would publish the CID for a DAG, and that DAG would associate the codec identifiers with the WASM binaries. And so you would look up in that DAG like, hey, which one of these? And then you would pull it out, and then you have like a call that is like a share nothing call to WASM, where you just say, here's a block of data and some memory, go decode this for me. You know, Volker, now that I think about it, I think Peter's right. We should put, in addition to just deserializing the entire structure, we should have a way for you to return just CIDs back, and come up with some kind of serialization for just CIDs. Because then if you're just parsing all the links out in order to do the graph traversal, that would work.
Yeah, but the problem is you would need to. So when we're discussing it, I thought about the same. But the problem is you still need. So you need to also return the path, because basically you do pathing on the, like on the input you do pathing to the CID, and so you also need to return the path to the CID.
No. Just here's a whole block. Give me back all of the paths to links. So the path and the link, and then that's just an array of tuples, right? So you just do a deg CBOR array of tuples back. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
But it'd be a different call than decode, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It will be like so basically probably the first version will just return everything, and then you can add things like pathing, which is like this is the most basic version of pathing, I guess. So you get backlinks, and then you can add new whatever like. But I guess So
well, we should start working on designing the data structure, but the data structure should basically be like a struct for the codec, and then for each method, right? For each one of these methods, you would just have a separate WASM entry point, right?
Yeah, it's just like a function call, basically. So you call you either call decode, or you call CIDs, or you call traverse. Or...
decode, links, and each one is just like a separate WASM binary.
And you need to maintain. Sorry, and you need to maintain the path or the breadcrumb, whatever you want to call it, in order to support a specialized selector only, or for something additional.
No, I don't know where the depth part came from, but
no, not the depth, but the actual path. Like, why do you need to maintain that part?
Well, no, often you need to know the path of the links. And when you traverse the block to get the links, you have the paths anyway. So like all of our APIs that just give you all the links in a block give you the paths as well, because there's no reason not to.
Yeah, but in this case, there is a reason not to. Because
Why?
Because then the design of this entire thing becomes even simpler, because you literally do not even need to think about like how to decode a map in this codec or anything like this. You literally just need to, in Seaboard, for example, look for anything that is tagged 42, and you don't care what structure it is in. You just need to return the links, and that's it.
So Dig Seaboard's not the best example.
But you need the path. So no, the problem is you need the path depending on the selector. So let's say the selector selects something within your object, and you only return CIDs. You can't. So from the selector's perspective, you can't tell if you're going to select a CID or not.
Yes, this was literally how I asked the question. Is this just for selectors, or you need it for something else? Because the context in which we need this entire thing, the selector is a select all anyway.
No, but not necessarily. I mean, you can craft a selector that's specific to a path, and then you would need to know it.
Yes, but in the context of Filecoin, it probably won't be the case. That's what I'm trying to say.
I mean, we have the whole selector engine there. You can actually use it in the retrieval market, and we haven't yet explored what people are going to do with that. And if you, especially in some of these like potential partial graph cases, like we have thought about like recursive selective criteria in paths and things like that. So you would want it. I mean, I'm not opposed to just having two methods, but given that like we don't know of a codec in which we can easily parse out the links without getting the path information anyway. Like all of our current codecs that I know of, when you go and look at them to get all the links, in order to even parse out the link, you have had to accumulate the path to the link already. So there's no reason not to return it. I think that like theoretically there could be a block format in the future that just put all of the links in the header without the paths to them. That's certainly possible, but I'm just not sure if we should optimize this for that. I mean, because it's just going to make the DAG way bigger, because we're going to end up having two methods for every codec, one for just the links and one for the link with paths.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure that it's been considered that for what you need it for, you don't actually need the paths at all. Yeah,
for one of the use cases, but we want to keep it flexible. We did the same thing in the JavaScript block API. It returned the paths as well.
That's fine.
One thing that I forgot to put in the notes, I should add it though, is that we did have the DAG Jose Kose call last week. And that went really well, actually. Things are a lot simpler than we'd initially made them out to be. So the sort of top level of that was that the actual format of the data for DAG Jose and Kose will be unchanged from the DAG Jose and Kose spec. It will basically just look identical. But when you use a DAG Jose or DAG Kose codec, that means that the thing you're signing is a link. So the binary payload that you're signing should be interpreted as a link. And in our codecs, we will want to add an adjoining property to the payload called link, so that it is like in the decoded data that you would traverse through it.
And I think we discussed that it was also going to be a versioned CID. So it implies at least version 1.
I think where we landed on that was that we said you should use
okay, should.
Yeah.
So I think we have to work out the wording, and I think just to add that to the, I guess where would we dump that documentation for that?
I believe that we have PRs that are open and started for the specs for those. And they were really complicated because we were talking about like alternative schemas and stuff like that. But now they should be a lot simpler. So I think in the IPLD specs repo, there should be like an open PR for the DAG Jose Kose specs. And that's where we want to say that for
verbiage there to actually make sure that we work on that. I think the other thing that I was working on, which is tangential, but is ABNF notation for IPLD. So ABNF is like all of the syntax for a fully qualified URL. And so, and this has to do, I mentioned it briefly to Dietrich, because I was working on getting the IPFS / scheme name registered, and I dropped the ball, mostly because I was the full qualified like path queried fragment for like has to be flushed out, and the current draft of the spec doesn't actually spell that out, but I think I was waiting to do this for IPLD until actually we get like things like selectors in that, like a full path query fragment interpretation. And I think I'm curious what your thoughts are, because it's certainly like all like the for instance, like the whole selectors is like this big paragraph of stuff that could certainly be shortened and be basically like a CID that represents the selector.
Right. We've also talked about the difference between a selector and a selector query, and that may be a slightly different schema. And we would also embed that. In the interest of getting something usable sooner, we could consider just doing, instead of IPLD : just CID : .. and then there's no selectors, no nothing. It's only a URL scheme to point at CIDs. That might be useful in the interim, because I don't know when we're going to figure out the pathing and selector stuff. It's like every time we open that box, the bottom of it looks deeper than it was before. And so, I mean, even like pathing, we don't have a stable spec for yet. And you know, Peter's actually done some work on it. And we're like still not entirely.
It didn't go well.
Yeah. It's like, it's a really tough problem. I think honestly, some of the stuff that you're talking about, selectors in selectors, might actually fix some of these problems for us. Like we may, like it may actually be a lot easier to just say, you know what, you need to just encode your selector as an IPLD object and then reference it by CID rather than trying to do, you know, paths as selection criteria, because it's just too complicated. That may be like the reasonable solution.
Yeah, and I think I like that. And I talked to Eric about that back in like Berlin. So that was a while ago.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're also looking at it in terms of the, we would like to get to the point where a car file, like a future version of the car file format, included a selector in the header. And so that selector would basically be the selection criteria that created the car file. So even when it's an incomplete graph, you always have a complete selector over it. And that would be a selector query in that case, for sure. Not a selector.
But I'm working on some of the interoperability with, let's say, did methods that use JSON-LD, and I want to be able to translate between CBOR, DAG CBOR, back to JSON, native JSON, and represent this and know that, let's say, the path, the link /link in JSON or tag 42 in CBOR is represented as basically as a fully qualified URI, in which case it would be conformant with the specification.
Right. No, man. Yeah. If you need the pathing, that's always a bit more difficult.
Yeah, I don't really need the pathing, although that would be helpful, because then there's so much robustness that actually you can do, especially for me in the did method that I did, IPLD. The anchoring into specific blockchains is actually would be important, because I'm blockchain agnostic to when doing proof signing and anchoring of these proofs into proof of existence.
I do wonder if we're missing just like a simpler path spec, because we have the data model, and if we're willing to say that paths are just only data model and we're not going to touch them beyond that, and at that point you're like in selectors, we should just be able to borrow the URL path rules and say that when you fall outside of this, like, I'm sorry, we can't path into your data, because we have the data model specifies like how all of the different potential key values would work. I don't think that we have a great system right now for differentiating between integers and strings. That's the only thing that I feel uncomfortable about.
Yeah, and the current path is basically JSON pointers, I think. So you're basically like indexing into a specific item in the array. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I like if we had a solution to that, I'd be comfortable putting out a regular spec that was only on the data model. Because we also say that string map keys need to be UTF-8, I think, in the data model spec as well. So
yeah, and that's a big the deal breaker for me, because CBOR, I mentioned, it allows for integers as keys, and that's the benefit of CBOR. And so I think
but
since
we don't support it in DegCBOR. We literally block it in DegCBOR. We
no,
say
exactly,
like, no.
yeah. And I mirrored that for the DID specification to basically mirror that, because I want it to be basically IPLD, but to be backwards compatible, or basically allow for full CBOR on top of IPLD, in which case the CID points to a CBOR object, in which case you just use the multi-codec that is CBOR, in which case everything works fine.
Right,
but it's a translation between this big IPLE object and stuff. I need to have in order for people to know, it's either the MIME type is application CBOR plus IPLD, or it's in JSON, but the JSON starts with IPLD : //.
Oh, interesting.
I don't even know if actually the // because it's not hierarchical. I'm sorry, it is hierarchical because it's a DAG, but it's not authoritative. And so this gets into what the ABNF rules have to say as far as the syntax required for a fully qualified URI, which happens to be IPLD objects.
Right. I mean, so data model also says map keys have to be strings. So if we're just purely data model, then we can just differentiate. We still need syntax in the path to differentiate items in an array from offsets in an array from string keys in a map, in order to differentiate a string 0 from an offset 0. Yeah, Peter?
So specifically on this part, at least in Go selector implementation, it is implemented as a kinded union on the resolver side. So if it is an array, it treats it as an offset. If it is a map, it treats it as a key with the string value of 1,
really?
2, 3, 4, 5. Yes.
Oh, that's smart.
However,
I like that.
the strings are no, there is no catch there, but there is a catch in the maps. Strings should be UTF-8 text. They're not must be. And Eric actually has tests for byte strings now in some of his stuff. That's what the spec says. I'm looking at it right now.
We should change the spec, because the data model spec says that they have to be.
No. The data model spec says that. It doesn't say must, it says should.
Okay, we need to change that. We don't have a representation in several languages for that. So it's like the only way that we can ensure cross-language compatibility.
I'm
no,
but the chat just so it's
that's a really good point though, where like you can actually just define the behavior on the data rather than on the interpretation of the path in the URL. Okay.
And if you try to do an array with a string that does not
it would just fail. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if you were trying to do it on a map, it would just convert it. And then that would also force people to never be able to use integer map keys. But
mission accomplished.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's get that spec in then for data model pathing, and then we can leverage the data model pathing for any kind of URI spec that we would ever need. That sounds good to me. And then for more advanced stuff, we can figure out selectors later. Like this is just only data model. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Good chat. Anything else? Cool. All right.
Yeah. Then it's the end of the meeting, and we meet again next week. So see you all then. Bye.
Rod, do you want to meet early, or do you want to? Cool.